This chapter is everything that's related to operating around an airport. Now you may say, well, I'm never going to operate near an airport. Well, don't say that. You may have a job one day where you have to fly pretty close to other airplane. In that case, you need to understand what is going on. You need to understand what the manned pilots are doing in their airplane, and that's what I'm going to try to give you here. Now, as always, this chapter is going to have probably more information than you need for the test. The reason I'm going in depth in all these chapters here is because it's very important for when you start flying as a remote pilot. So more than just giving you the basics for the test, I'm going to give you what I have been using as a drone pilot, what I have encountered as a drone pilot in the field, and as a manned pilot, what I want you to know so you can safely operate around me as a manned pilot in my airplane. The reading material for this is going to be, as always, in the PHAK, the Pilot Handbook of Aeronautical Knowledge, in chapter 14. Now, there's a small section in here, 14.1 to 14.5, that talks about all of this. There's a lot more information, really, about all of this in other documents that I'm going to give you in a second. One of them is in your study guide, chapter 11. And then also, if you are looking for the standards for this, it's going to be in the ACS, the Airman Certification Standard, and it's going to be in part 5, the operation, and that's task B. The different topics that we're going to talk about, the first one is the type of airports that you're going to find out there. Then we'll talk about the true versus magnetic north, and the reason we're talking about this is because we're talking about runway orientation. How are runway oriented, and then how is it labeled on the runway? Based on that, we'll talk about traffic pattern. I have a 3D model of an airport that I'm going to show you what the 3D looks like, so you can have a better picture of everything going on around the airport. We'll talk about wind and pattern indicators, and then we'll talk about a section that, quite frankly, I think is absolutely unnecessary for you to know about, but it's in the test. So we're going to go backwards here, and I'm going to teach you something that I don't think you need to know, but that the FAA does. So we'll go over all the different signs. Just learn them. They're not really difficult. It's just something that I think we could be skipping and spending more time on something else. Then we'll talk about airport beacons. We'll talk about how you find airport data. And there's a lot of different places where we can find airport data. The first one is the chart supplement, then notice to airman, the ATIS, and then finally, there's one more on the airport data that we're going to cover in the next chapter. It's going to be charts, a full chapter just on charts and how to reach charts and everything. And then at the end of this course, we'll go over the typical FAA questions as always, and then you can see what's going to be on the test and the kind of questions that the FAA is going to be asking you. So let's get going. Let's get started. The reason why we go over all of this is because it's important for you to understand what the operations look like near an airport in case you're going to be flying near an airport. Now, an airport refers to as any area that is intended for landing or for takeoff of aircraft. There's different types of airports. The first one is towered airport and untowered airport. That's going to be the general classification that we use, and we'll go over each of these in a second in more detail, talking about what it means towered, what it means untowered. Now, each of these airports can be divided into subtypes, and the first one is going to be a civil airport, which is going to be the most common number of airports in the country is going to be a civil airport that's going to be open to the public. Then we have military or federal government airports. These are not open to the public, so you don't want to go and fly out there. And then the last one is going to be a private airport that's going to require permission from the owner in order to fly there. Now, be careful. All of the information I'm giving you here is going to be based on manned aircraft, and the reason I'm giving you this angle is because I want you to be familiar with what they have to do, because we have to fly around them. Remember, we have to give them priority when we fly, so we have to understand what happens at airports, and that's just going to make everybody safer. The first type of airport, towered airport. You can see a picture of the tower right here. All it means is got an operating control tower, and we call that ATC, air traffic control, ATC. So you're going to hear me say ATC a lot. It means that there's a guy or a girl in the control tower that's giving you directions, giving you things that you have to do. Now, ATC is responsible for providing a safe and orderly flow of air traffic. That's their job. Their job is to make sure that whoever is flying around their airspace is doing it safely without colliding into each other. From a manned aircraft standpoint, communication with ATC is required for all aircraft. Everybody who enters the airspace that is controlled by ATC has to follow the instructions of ATC, which means that they have to communicate with them. Now, in the case of a non-towered airport, it's going to be a little bit different. There's no operating control tower, which means that there is no one sitting there telling pilots what they need to do. This can be found at smaller airports that have low traffic, and there's actually a lot of airports in the country that are non-towered. I would actually say there's more non-towered airports than there are towered airports. In this case, because there is no one else, radio communication is not required at those airports. In this case, if you are listening to the frequency around an airport that is non-towered, then you're going to be listening to what we call a Common Traffic Advisory Frequency, or a UNICOM frequency. UNICOM stands for Universal Integrated Community. And really what it means is there is a frequency available out there, and pilots can make radio calls on that radio frequency if they want to. It's not required, it's recommended, but not everyone does it, so you have to be very careful. We're going to talk about this in more detail when we talk about radio communications in the next chapter. So I'm going to give you tips of what to listen for and what it's going to sound like. So again, more information coming up very shortly. Where all the different lines intersect. And then here, before we move to the next topic, which is talking about runways, I want to introduce this idea of true versus magnetic north. And you may already be familiar with this just from real life experience, but we orient ourselves by using two main references. The first one is called the true north, and the true north is the North Pole. Okay, if you look at the map and you look at the very north of the globe, that's going to be our North Pole. Now, if we look at any kind of map or charts, these charts and these maps are using the north as the true north. That's what we reference to. The downside is there's another one, which is called the magnetic north. And the magnetic north is the location of the Earth's magnetic field. Now, inside of the Earth, there's a whole bunch of stuff that creates a magnetic field. And that the magnetic field, interestingly, the magnetic pole is not at the same location as the physical Earth pole. That's where it gets confusing, because it changes over time. Actually, there was an article not too long ago that I saw in the news where they were talking about the fact that the magnetic north is moving at a pace that's faster than it's ever been recorded in the past, which is really interesting. The thing is, the reason why we have the magnetic north and why we care about the magnetic north is because our instruments inside of the airplane, when we fly manned aircraft is going to be referencing to the magnetic north. So there's a lot of indications on charts, for example, that are going to help us identify the difference between the true north and the magnetic north. Now, if we look right here on this chart, and this is something I took from Google Earth, you can see at the very top right here, this is the true north. This is the North Pole at the top of the globe, where all the different lines intersect. And then here is actually, last time I checked, was the location of the magnetic north, which is somewhere in the middle of the ocean. The difference between the true and the magnetic north is going to be measured in degrees, and then those degrees are referred to as variation. So variation is a term that you're going to hear me say. If we look at different locations on the Earth, then there's a different variation for each of these places. Now, we always talk about variation as either being east or west. So it's going to be X number of degrees east of variation or X number of degrees west of variation. So for example, where I live, it's about 11 degrees of variation as I'm recording these slides. Now, if we look again in 2 or 3 years, it could be completely different. It could be 10 degrees, it could be 12 degrees. These numbers are going to change over time. They've changed a lot since I've been in aviation. I've been in aviation for 15 years. They've changed quite a bit. As a matter of fact, when we get to the runway, I'll tell you a little story about the runway where I used to fly. In order to convert from what we call true north to magnetic north, we have to add or subtract the variation. And the way you're going to do this is use the saying that is east is least, west is best. Okay? East, we're going to subtract east variation, and we're going to add west variation. And the way that we do it is we go from true plus or minus the variation gives us the magnetic north. All the charts that we look at are oriented based on the true north, based on the North Pole. So there are lines on the charts that are going to tell us what the variation is, and these lines are called isogonic lines. And we're going to talk about this when we talk about charts. I'm going to show you what the line looks like and what the number is, and then how we can add it or subtract it. The reason I talked about true and magnetic north is because we have to talk about runway orientation. Each of the runways are oriented based on a magnetic number. It's always based on magnetic. And again, if you can't remember that, just remember what are pilots using inside of their airplane. They're using a magnetic compass. They're using something that is in reference to the magnetic north. So in this case, the runways are going to be oriented using magnetic orientation. Now it's a 2-digit number, and it's going to tell us basically which way the runway is oriented. And the way that it works is we use the compass rose. And the compass rose, you're probably familiar with it, 360 possible degrees, north, south, east, and west. And this is what it looks like. If we take a circle and we divide it into different quadrants, then we have north at the top, which is 360 degrees or 0 degrees, depending on how you want to look at it. Then we have south, which is 180 degrees. Then we have east, and I'm going to say 090. That's going to make more sense when we talk about radio communication. This is a standard. 090 is 90 degrees. We just say every single digit individually. So 090 is east, and 270 is going to be west. So 180 south, 360 is going to be north. And we can go and divide this into more different quadrants in here. We have 030, and the opposite is going to be 210. 060, opposite is going to be 240, and then it continues 12, and then 150, and then 330 being the opposite. This is just a few of the 360 possible degrees that we have available on this compass rose. Now, in some cases, you're going to hear people say northeast, northeast, southwest, and all of this. This is how it looks like. 045 and 225 are going to be the equivalent of northeast and southeast here at 135, southwest at 225, and then northwest at 315. So you can see here between north and east is northeast, south and east is going to be southeast, and so on and so forth. We can even go one more step further, where the difference between north and northeast is going to be northeast, and then difference between east and northeast is going to be east northeast, and so on and so forth. East southeast, south southeast, south southwest, west southwest, west northwest, and then north northwest. You don't have to remember all of these, but if you ever hear these terms, that's what they refer to. So as you start getting more familiar, especially if you become a manned aircraft pilot, then you will definitely be familiar with all of these terms. So the reason I'm saying all this is because runways are going to be using these numbers. Now, here's an example. This runway right here is called runway 1836. Now you notice that the 36 number is at the bottom. And the reason is, imagine yourself sitting right here on that number 36, looking at the end of the runway. And as you look at the end of the runway, you're heading, the orientation of your face, of your eyesight, is going to be 360. You're going to be looking north. If you're sitting on the other side of the runway, on that 18 number, then you're going to be facing south. So that runway orientation is 180 degrees. So we take the last digit, the 0, and then we remove it. And all it is runway 18 because it's oriented towards 180. Let's take a look at another example. Here we have this runway oriented towards the kind of the northeast section. So that section is going to be 030 because when we sit at the end of the runway in our airplane, looking at the end of the runway, we are on the heading of 030. So 03 is the number, and then 21 is on the other side. Again, this one right here, 090 and 270. So that side of the runway on the left side, when we sit on the number 09 and we look at the end of the runway, 090 is our heading, a heading of east. I have a funny story. I used to fly at an airport that was runway 422, 0422. So 040 on one side, 220 on the other side. As you know, as I've told you, the runways are oriented based on magnetic north, except the magnetic north changes. So over time, 040, which actually was 044, they round down that number, became 045. And 045 gets rounded up to 050. So guess what? Runway 4 became runway 5. So instead of being on 422, we were on 523. That was completely different numbering. They had to remove the numbers, repaint the numbers. Everybody that used to fly there, the controllers, everybody had to relearn that runway 4 all of a sudden was runway 5. So these things happen. It does change. That's how you remember. If you have a question on the test that says which way are the runways oriented, is it magnetic or is it true? It's magnetic because they're going to change eventually. When we have parallel runways like we do here at big airports, then we're going to use the symbols right and left. So 36R is 36 right, and then 36 left is 36L. And if you look on the other side, 36 right is also associated with 18 left, because if you're looking from the other side coming into the runway, you would have runway 18 on the left side and then runway 18 right on the other side. So 18 left, 36 right, 18 right, 36 left. If you have more than 2 runways, 3 runways, then it's going to be 36 left, 36 center, and 36 right. If you have more than 3 runways, then they have to actually change 1 digit. So runway 36 would become runway 35, even though it's not runway 35, it's still runway 36 something, but they have to remove 10 degrees or add 10 degrees to make it the right orientation. There are some airports that do have more than 3 parallel runways. Another thing that you might see is this kind of symbol right here on the runway where you have crosses. This means that this is a closed runway. It means that nobody can land there. The runway is probably in pretty bad shape. Now for you as a remote pilot, this means that there's going to be no traffic at this airport. It means that you can probably get a little bit closer if you want to take a look. This takes us to the traffic pattern. Now that we know what the runway's orientations are, we need to understand how patterns or how traffic is organized at a specific airport. The reason why we're doing this is because if you start operating close to an airport, then you want to understand which way the airplanes are going to be going and which way they may be going over your area where you may be flying. I fly close to an airport. I don't fly really all that close to the traffic pattern, but I've had one mission where I had to fly pretty close to the traffic pattern. And because of my understanding of this, I was able to look at the airplane and say, hey, I know what that airplane is doing. I know it's in a traffic pattern for this runway, and I know what altitude it's at because I understand traffic patterns. So this is why I'm giving you this information here, so you can get a better picture, a better image of what it looks like to be flying around an airport. Most of the legs of the traffic pattern are going to happen between the surface when the airplane is taking off and 1,000 feet when the airplane is in the highest of all the legs in a traffic pattern. So the airplane is going to be climbing to that 1,000 feet. So in between the transition, it's going to go from the surface to 1,000 feet. You notice what I said in here, above ground level, AGL. This is a term that we use a lot, above ground level. It means that if the surface is right here, it's 1,000 feet above the surface. One thing that you understand, because if you fly near an airport, you may hear somebody on the radio. Pilots are going to be calling out about 10 miles away from the airport to request an entry into the pattern. That's in most cases for either untowered airport or towered airport. The procedure is kind of the same. So even if you're 10 miles away and you're listening to the radio, you may hear them actually talking on the radio, or you may see an airplane flying on top of you, and that's what they're doing. Here's an example of a traffic pattern And these legs that you see right here, I'm going to show them to you in a minute in 3D, but I wanted to show you the terms that I'm going to be using. And the first one is this one right here, which is called the upwind. And the upwind is going to be where the airplane takes off from that runway. That's going to be the first leg. As we take off, we're up into the wind. Now, why is it called the upwind? When we take off and when we land, we always want to be into the wind. That's the best way to get the best performance out of the airplane. So that's why we call it upwind. We're going up against the wind. There's two options here. Either the pilot is going to remain in the pattern, or the pilot is going to go away from the pattern, in which case they're going to go into the departure leg of the pattern. This is what you see right here. Now, in most cases, if they stay in the pattern, then they're going to go into this right here, which is called a crosswind. And it makes sense because now you have the wind coming from the side. That's going to be our crosswind leg. At this stage, the airplane is still climbing, more than likely, all the way to 1,000 feet. So on this leg right here, it's going to be probably about 600 to 1,000 feet altitude for the airplane. Then we get into this leg right here, which is called a downwind leg. The downwind leg is where the airplane is going to be at 1,000 feet above ground level. This leg right here is the entry leg, where the pilot is going to join the traffic pattern in order to follow either another aircraft or to just go ahead and land. So this is called the entry leg. It's usually what we call midfield downwind. Midfield, in the middle of the field, in the middle of the runway where you're going to land, and in the downwind leg. So midfield downwind, and they enter at about 1,000 feet right there. Then we have the base leg, which is where the airplane is going to start descending. So right at the end of the downwind leg is when the airplane is going to start descending, and then into the base they're descending to go land on the runway. And then we have the final, which is the final leg, which is right before the touchdown on the runway. So you have all the legs right here: upwind, crosswind, downwind, base, and final. Another thing that we have in here is called a segmented circle. Now, this is something that you would see from the air. This is something that would be painted on the ground. And this is something that men pilots use to figure out where the traffic pattern is for a specific runway. Now, what I want you to look at right here is several things. There's several indications. There's these little L-shape things, and then in the middle we have the wind indicator that's going to tell you the wind cone or the tetrahedron. Now, I wanted to show you the segmented circle right here. Imagine that the base, the longer, thicker side of the segmented circle is the runway. So in this case, I superimposed runway 927 in here, and then also runway 36 and 18 right here. And that's what these circles are telling you. Now, the little tick marks on the side, those are the traffic pattern indicators, and these are going to tell you which way the traffic is going to come from. So in here, if we look at runway 9, we can see the little tick mark are on the north side, which means that our pattern here is going to be left turns. If you're in the downwind, which is the top part of this diagram, downwind, base, final, and that little arrow that's right at the end, that's our final leg right there. So downwind, base, and final, and these are all left turn. We're making left turn. So this on runway 9 would be a left traffic pattern. If we look at this one right here on runway 27, if we were to land on runway 27, this would be again our downwind, base, and then final. This would be all right turn. So this would be a right traffic pattern for runway 27. Then we have this one. If we look at runway 36 right here at the bottom, runway 36, guess what? This is also a left traffic pattern because we are making left turn from the downwind, base, final, right into the runway. And then on runway 18, you guessed it, this is a right traffic pattern on runway 18 all the way into the final. Left and right, this is how we find which way the traffic pattern is. I'll show you another source in a minute, which is called the chart supplement, where we can find where the published information for that airport is and find what the traffic pattern is going to be. By default, a traffic pattern is going to be left turn. So if nothing is written anywhere, it's going to be left turn for default traffic pattern. Let's go ahead and take a look at this in 3 dimensions so you can see a little bit better the area that I'm talking about and see kind of the dimension based on the runway. So I know that you guys are not going to be flying the airplane in a pattern, but I want to show you what it looks like on a 3D view. And this is a 3D model right here of an airport. And what we're going to do is I want to show you what it is going to look like and what you need to be looking for from a drone perspective. So here's the upwind leg. This is up the wind because that's how we take off, right, into the wind with aircraft. And we're going to make a left turn. You can see the airplane making a left turn here and starting to climb, going into our crosswind leg. And I wanted to give you a size perspective here. The airplane here is almost at the traffic pattern altitude, which is 1,000 feet. It gets into that very high altitude here on the downwind leg. So this is the downwind leg right here. We're going to be flying in a downwind leg. You can see it keeps going. It's across from the runway. Now this is doing left turn, so we're doing a left traffic pattern here. And right abeam from the numbers is when the airplane is going to start to descend. So across from the numbers, we're going to start to descend, make a left turn, and at the 45-degree angle right here is when the airplane is going to start to turn left. So from here, we go to the base, and in base, we're going to turn into our final. The entire time in base and final, the airplane is descending, and then eventually is going to touch down and get onto the runway. So that's your pattern. That's your upwind, crosswind, downwind, and all the different legs that we talked about before. Now, if we look at it from the top, here you can see a runway 9 and runway 27. The airplane is going to be making left turns here. And left turn, you see the little tick marks. The little tick marks are showing off that we're making left turns. We're going to be on that side of the pattern, on the north side of the pattern. If we flip over, we're going to be doing right turns on runway 27. So we're using runway 27 in this case here, and we're making right turns. Now on the big runway, the north-south runway, which is the one we're looking at right now, we have the same exact thing. We have our upwind, we have our crosswind, we have our downwind, and we have our final base and final. And so that's the entire airport. Now we look at the runway here on runway 36. We are taking off on runway 36. Based on those marks right here, we're going to be making a left turn on runway 36. So that's a left pattern. And then if we flip the airplane over, then we're going to be on runway 18. We're going to be making right turns on runway 18. So there's always right turn and left turn on the same runway, depending on what side of the runway you're going to be using. So that's our airport right here. A quick overview of the traffic pattern, and I hope this helps. If you're flying near an airport and maybe there is not a whole lot of activity and you want to find out, hey, where's the wind coming from? Well, you can look at these wind direction indicators, and there's 3 of them. The most common one being the windsock, and the windsock is the one that you see in red right here. And the windsock is going to inflate. Think about it as like a plastic bag that's going to inflate with the wind. And then the tail of the windsock, if the tail is dragging down, then it's going to tell you there's not a whole lot of wind. And if the tail is all the way up and fully erect, then it's going to tell you basically that there is a lot of wind. The direction of the windsock is going to also tell you where the direction of the wind is coming from. So if the tail, the direction of the tail is where the wind is leaving, so the direction from the wind is on the opposite side. Another one that we can see in here is called a tetrahedron. And a tetrahedron is this weird kind of triangular shape that you see right here, kind of like a pyramid almost, or like a half pyramid. And the pointy tip of that pyramid is going to be the bottom tip, which here on this diagram is on the right side, is going to be pointing towards where the wind is coming from. It's going to line up with the wind. And the last one is called a wind T because it's like shaped like a T, and that's actually shaped like the wing of an airplane. So the top of the T is the wings, and then the base of the T is the fuselage of the airplane. And basically it does the same thing. It's going to line itself up with the wind, and the side of the T is where the wind is coming from. The tail of the T is where the wind is going. So now you can see where the wind is coming from. Now I want to give you another tip, which is not really in these slides, but it's something that I've been using as a manned pilot and as a UAS pilot, is how to use other features around you to find where the wind is coming from. Now, obviously, the trees is going to be one of them. It's easy to see. You can see where the trees, the leaves are moving. If you have grass, just grab a little bit of grass, cut the grass, and then just let it go in the wind and see where the wind is going. That can help you with your takeoff. It can help you with figuring out the direction of the wind. So when you get off the ground with your quadcopter, you don't get drifted into a tree. And then another thing that you can look at is also the waves on the lake. And you can see where the wind is coming from just by looking at the waves. So these are natural wind indicators if you want, not in these slides, but they can be very helpful. Here's the section about markings on the taxiway and on the runway. Again, like I said in the introduction, I don't really think this is something that you necessarily need to know because you're not really going to be flying at an airport, but just consider it as cool knowledge that you can share with someone at a dinner and look interesting. Just look at it that way. There's two different types of markings. There's markings for taxiways and there's markings for runways. On the taxiway, this is what you're going to find. The taxiway is the roads that's going to help us to get to the runway. Okay, that's what we call a taxiway. We're going to taxi to the runway. There's two different signs in here. There's the black background, which is going to be our indication and then our location, and then we have the direction signs on a yellow background. The black background tells us that we are located on taxiway Alpha 4. That's the name of the taxiway. That's how it's identified. And then on this side, we have the directions to taxiway Alpha. So what this is telling me is that I'm located on taxiway A4. Imagine a road, taxiway Alpha 4. And then at the end of the road, if I go left, I'm going to be on taxiway Alpha. If I go right, I'm also going to be on taxiway Alpha. So this is kind of a T. This Alpha 4 is going to go up and then butt into an intersection like this where Alpha is going to be on the left, Alpha is going to be on the right. This is our current location, Alpha 4. I'm going to show you in a second on a 3D airport, the same one that I used for the traffic pattern, where these would be located and then what they would indicate based on where you are. Here's an example of what we just looked at. This means that right here, we are located on taxiway Delta and that taxiway Bravo is right at the end. So again, this is like a T intersection. That sign would be right here on the left side where it says Delta. I'm located on taxiway Delta. And then at the end of it, I have a T intersection and taxiway Bravo is right there. In some cases, these can also be used in conjunction with runway markings. Now, taxiways are going to have a letter as an identifier. Runways are going to have a digit, a 2-digit number. We've seen this before in the previous slides. So in this case, I am currently located on taxiway on runway 18. And if I make a right turn, then I'm going to get off the runway to get onto taxiway Alpha 2. Very straightforward. Another sign that we really need to pay attention to is going to be the hold short line. And that hold short line is going to be the indication between where the taxiway ends and where the upcoming runway starts. Very important for manned pilots because you have to get a clearance. You have to be told that you're okay to go onto the runway. So these signs for manned pilots, we emphasize them a lot because if you cross that line without getting the proper clearance, then you can get in big trouble. You can get in big trouble because you broke the regulation, but also you can get in big trouble because another airplane can be coming in final and landing. This is what it would look like from sitting inside of the airplane. You have a line right here on the ground. See that double yellow and that a double dotted line? That's our hold short line. And what it says, there's a big letter in red. It says 1836. This means that on the other side of that line, there is runway 1836. And as soon as we cross the line, we're technically on the runway. It also says on those signs on the left and right side, it says, hey, you're on taxiway Alpha 2, and then runway 1836 is coming up right in front of us. Again, this is a top view. You can see taxiway Bravo, runway 422, and then here we would have our hold short line, and then here we would have a symbol, a sign that would say taxiway Bravo, that's where you are, and then if you cross the line, then you get to runway 422. Now, that solid line is just like when you're driving. You cannot cross the solid line until you have clearance from the controller to tell you, yes, you are good to go on runway 22, clear to go on runway 22. The last kind of marking that I want to show you is the do not enter sign. Aircraft are going to be prohibited from going past this sign, just like it would be for if you see the sign on the road. All right, let's go ahead and take a look at all these runway markings and these taxiway signs in the 3D model so you can get a bigger picture of what it looks like in real life. All right, let's take a look at this runway model here because it's been quite a bit of time actually creating this thing. And the reason I did it is because I really wanted to show you all the possible different types of markings and signs available at different airports. And I couldn't find an airport that had all of them, so I just did it. I just went in there and I read the advisory circulars on how to create airports, and I have some background obviously with my degree and everything. But so here you have it. This is my airport, and I'm going to show you this view right here. This is the kind of the layout. So we have two intersecting runways. We have a 0927 runway right here, and we have a 9 right here oriented to the east, this one oriented to the west, and we have runway 18 right here pointing south, and then we have runway 36 right here pointing north. So this is the layout, and we have taxiways obviously all the way around it. So I'm gonna kind of give it an angle like this and then zoom in. I made a control tower that looks like a chess piece, kind of. I made a windsock indicator here and a pattern indicator. And I hope I'm not making you dizzy by moving this around, but this is your hold short line. Now you notice there's no taxiway signs on the side because I want to keep that away for now, but this is your hold short line. There's an enhanced taxiway line right here, which you will see, which we've seen in the slides, and then there is runway 36 coming up on the other side of this line, so you cannot cross this line unless you have approval. And then this is the taxiway line that sends you to the runway. Now taxiway, you notice everything is yellow, okay? And a runway is going to be everything is white unless it's the emergency stop area right there. Now we have 36 right here, and then we have 1836 right here, and then 1836 again. Now the reason it says 36 is because it's at the end of the runway. Now if the taxiway was on the other side, it would say 3618. Now let's go ahead and take a look at some runway signs because I have signs right here. I have a lot of signs. I have runway sign, taxiway signs, but I want to show you the runway signs for now. Now you see this sign right here tells me that I am on runway 18 and that we have taxiway Alpha 2 to the right. So if I'm landing, I have 3,000 feet of runway, I get that far, and I have either tower told me to turn right on Alpha 2, then I will turn right here on Alpha 2. And here's what you'll see when you do that. You're going to see a sign that, first off, I'm going to be clearing the runway, so I'm going to be passing this hold short sign right here and get past it. Now I'm no longer on the active runway, and I see a taxiway that says Alpha 2, and I'm on Alpha 2, and then left and right, I'm going to have Alpha, taxiway Alpha. So this right here on the top is taxiway Alpha right here. If we look at this sign right here, this is our taxiway sign. This taxiway sign is going to tell us that we are on taxiway Alpha, and if we keep going, then we're going to make a left on taxiway Alpha 1. If I look at the other side, it's going to say we are on taxiway Alpha, and if I make a right, I'm on Alpha 2. And we've identified that this is Alpha 2 already. If I get here to the hold short line, I know I'm on Alpha 2. And again, I have my hold short line telling me, hey, be careful, there's runway 36 coming up. And then here it says Alpha 2, and runway 1836 is right in front of me. Okay? So I think all these signs kind of make sense. They're pretty self-explanatory. Again, we have them here. Now, here we get to the land and hold short runway. So we have land and hold short going on at this airport, which means that if I'm landing on this runway, which is runway 36, okay, this 36, if I'm landing on this runway 36, and there is land and hold short operation going on, lasso operation, then on runway 927, which is the crossing runway right here, somebody else is going to be landing, so I have to be careful. So here you see it says you're on runway 36, and there's runway 927. There's a hold short line that I cannot cross unless I have approval, because right down the runway here, somebody else is doing operations. So that's again another taxiway or runway sign in this case. And we would have, this is another taxiway, so this is taxiway Bravo. And this also has a whole short line here, because if you continue, you're going to be crossing runway 3816. Look at this, 3618. 36 on the left, 18. So that tells me that runway 18, the end of the runway 18 is on the right here, and the end of the runway 36 is on the left right here as I'm crossing. Okay, so here I need approval before, I need clearance before I can cross this line. In order to identify airports at night, then we have what's called a beacon. Now, this is at night. This is also in very low visibility. Now, imagine yourself, put yourself in the shoes of a manned aircraft pilot, and you're just flying around, and you need to identify where airports are located at night. Very difficult to see if you don't have that beacon. Now, think of the beacon as like a lighthouse for boats. It's the exact same thing. And it's going to be active from sunset to sunrise, or if the conditions are low, below what we call VFR, Visual Flight Rule Minimums. We're going to talk about VFR in a little bit. Just think about VFR as good weather conditions to go fly. Okay, so if the conditions are below VFR, then we're going to see these lights. And these lights, they're kind of like a rotating beacon, just like a lighthouse. And if it's a civilian airport, it's going to be a white light and then a green light, a white light and a green light. So if you just stand there and look at the airport, then you're going to see these lights flashing one after the other. If it's a military airport, then you're going to have white, green, well, two whites and then one green, two whites and then one green. If you go to a water airport, then it's going to be white and yellow alternating. And then if you go to a heliport, then it's going to be white, yellow, and green, white, yellow, and green. It's going to keep alternating between all of these. I want to talk about operating near airports, and there is a few rules that you have to follow, and then you have to remember that unless you are operating in controlled airspace, it is actually okay to fly near an airport. You don't need any kind of authorization, but there's a big but right here. Do not interfere with any aircraft operation. Do not interfere with any aircraft operation. This is also part of the regulation, if you remember the regulation. So you have to be careful that you have to really pay attention to what is going on. The first thing that you should do is you need to be aware of the traffic pattern. You need to be aware of what is going on with the other aircraft, which way they're going. And we talk about traffic pattern in this lesson, so pay extra attention there. And also make sure that you're not operating near the short final where the aircrafts are about to land, because that's going to create an issue right here. Another note is about operating on airport property. Some commercial operation, you may have a job where you have to go on the airport property. And if that's the case, you have to be aware of certain areas in there that are restricted areas, not restricted areas necessarily to fly. I'm sure there will be some of those, but restricted areas to actually walk, to be on airport property. And these properties are called SIDA, and it's a security identification display area. This means that you need to have a badge. Okay, I used to work at an airport. I worked at several airports. And when I did, we always had a badge, and that badge will allow us to go into the SIDA. And the SIDA would be on your badge, actually, it would say SIDA approved or whatever label they wanted to use. And that's just an area that's restricted in access. So in this case, you have to be wearing your badge at all time. As a matter of fact, we were trained that if you see someone without a badge, then it looks really suspicious, and then you have to go and talk to someone. Another thing that I want to talk about here, which may look a little bit specific, but it's called flying the wire environment. And flying the wire means that you're flying at low altitude close to wires. There's a lot of wires out there. You've got guy wires. You have a lot of wires that are going to be more than likely invisible from the ground or even from the camera that you're looking at. If you think about power lines, okay, power line wires are really small in relationship to everything else. And depending on the contrast, you may not be able to see them. If you're a little bit higher than the wires and the camera is oriented down and then there's a background that's pretty dark behind it, you're not going to see the wire. Even if it's against a very bright background like the sky, you may still not be able to see it. So this is what we call flying the wire. Now this is something that usually is done for helicopter pilots. That's the kind of training that they get, but you also need to be aware of all this. So judging the depth and the distance from the wire is going to be extremely difficult, and that can lead to a collision with the wire. Now this can cause damage to the wire in itself, damage to the infrastructure around it, and that can be very costly, and it can actually create disruption and just not something that you want to do. Okay, so you want to be watching also for the guy wires, what we call guy wires, which are these wires that are attached to tall towers, electrical towers, antennas, for example, to keep the tower from moving too much. These are going to be difficult to see as well, especially if you are doing any kind of inspection. If you're doing inspections, then you need to be aware of all these wires. So how do you deal with this? Always do a pre-flight. Walk the area, take a look at the area, see if you see those electrical poles, for example. That's going to help you figure out that, well, hey, there's a pole, there's probably going to be a wire in here, and identify the potential hazards. Use your sectional charts. On the sectional chart, you will see some of these symbols, and we'll take a look at those when we go into more detail. Some other things that you need to consider in terms of operation is operation with lasers. Lasers cannot be pointed towards aircraft. You are an aircraft, so make sure that if you fly in an area where you get a laser pointed at the aircraft, that has to be actually reported to ATC. If somebody's flashing a laser at a UAS, chances are they're going to do the same in flashing it in the cockpit. You will be amazed at how many people actually do this and how many laser reports there are from pilots to the air traffic controller. It's kind of alarming, actually. So if you notice any of this, then you need to report it to ATC. Something else that you may want to consider, and I know this is pretty specific, is flying in the vicinity of a thermal plume. And what I mean by this is if you're going to be doing an inspection, for example, of a power plant or any kind of industrial production or industrial system out there, then there's going to be hot air, and that hot air is going to create a turbulence, and that could actually reduce the visibility. It can do a lot of things. The heat created by this can actually mess up with your electronics and then create a failure. So this is something that you need to be paying attention to. The reason I'm talking about all this, by the way, is because this is an item that is in the Airman Certification Standard, and the FAA wants me to tell you about these items. So pay attention, because this could actually be on the test. I don't teach for the test, but this could actually be on the test. Another thing you want to avoid is areas that have any kind of wildlife, birds or wildlife. These are going to be reported by air traffic control or even by a NOTAM. There's something that's called a bird TAM. That's going to be a notice to airmen for birds. So you want to stay away from all these activities. Another place that you want to stay away from is unmanned balloons. Unmanned balloons, as a matter of fact, I will add manned balloons as well, you want to stay away from, but unmanned balloons are going to be these big balloons that are usually attached to a cable, and that cable is going to be, just like flying in the wire, is going to be very difficult to see and to avoid. So these are going to be marked on the sectional chart. You want to be paying attention and kind of staying away from them. Part of this presentation, I want to talk about the sources of airport data. Before you fly near an airport, you want to find out as much as you can about the airport. That's going to be part of your pre-flight. That's going to be part of your briefing, of your planning procedure before you operate near an airport. Now, you may get a contract. I've seen people on one of the group I belong to on Facebook that's flying at Detroit, is flying videos at the airport, flying with other aircraft flying around. I can't even imagine the amount of training that they had to go through in order to make sure they understood what everything that was going on. So having this knowledge right here would be critical in order to do that kind of operation. There's 4 sources where we can find airport information. And the first one is called the chart supplements. I'm going to get back to that in a minute. I'm going to introduce all of them and we'll talk about them individually. Then we have the NOTAM, the Notices to Airmen. Then we have the ATIS, which is a weather information. And the last one is going to be aeronautical charts. I'm going to spend a whole chapter in the next chapter talking about charts, talking about all the information you can find on charts and how to reach charts. So be ready. There's another like hour and a half to 2 hours just talking about charts. In terms of the chart supplement, what it does is it's going to provide you with detailed information for each of the airports that are found in the country. Now, the interesting part about this is it used to be called an AFD. It's been called AFD for, I don't know, maybe even ever since this product was created. It was called an AFD, Airport Facility Directory. The FAA decided to rename this product to Chart Supplement a few years ago. So from time to time, you're going to hear me say AFD because that's what I've said my whole life. It's Chart Supplement. It's the same thing. I was going to say the AFD. The chart supplement is divided into 9 different regions that cover the entire country. And you can see them right here. These are the different regions. Now, for me, I live in the Southwest. So if I get this book or if I download it, because it's available for free to download online, then I'm going to get this product right here that's going to have all of the airports located in the Southwest region of the country. What I recommend that you do is I'm going to show you in a minute how they look, is download the same thing that I have, the Southwest, and take a look at some airports, and then download the one for your region and take a look at what the airports look like near where you fly, so you get a better idea of what information is contained. The place where you're going to find we have the current edition and then the next edition right here. Now, this is application data. This is something that if you're a developer and you're using data that you want to use. Otherwise, you want to use this. Then here you have all the different sections, and you can download individually as PDF, or you can download all of them right here as a zip file. So it's up to you, whichever you want to use. We're going to be using the Southwest. I downloaded the new one, November 8th, 2018. So I'm just going to be using that one. Now, it doesn't really matter which version we're using at this stage. Make sure that when you're using them, though, you're using the most recent one. So let's go ahead and take a look at the PDF itself. Here's the cover for it. And you can see, again, very important that we start with the top. First off, are you using the right one? So this is the Southwest. And then are you using the proper effective date? This is effective from the 8th of November 2018 to the 3rd of January 2019. And these are all the states that are covered by this very specific chart supplement. And then we get to some general information. I'm not going to spend too much time in here, but then we get to the table of contents. This is where you can see the different sections, and you can see these are actually clickable, so you can go to each of the areas. Remember the legend, remember section 2, AFD, Airport Facility Directory, then some notices, then we have associated data, and remember I told you there's phone numbers and different things in here. This is all the different sections in here, so it's actually almost a little less than 100 pages associated with the section 4. And then section 5 is going to be airport diagram, airport hotspots, and then a legend as well. So let's go and start with the start. Let's go with section 1 actually right here. So the legend, like I said, is going to be where you spend most of your time, because this is where you're going to be learning about the AFD. This is what a sample page for an airport is going to look like in the chart supplement. I just said AFD. First thing is going to be the city name right here. And again, the way you use this legend is you're going to be using this. This is number 1. If you scroll down after you see the sample page, there's a sketch legend right here. Then you're going to go to number 1, and it's going to tell you what it is exactly. So if you go in here and you go to section 22 and you don't know what section 22 means, then you go to section 22 in here, and you're going to find it, and it's going to tell you everything you need to know about section 22, which is, you can see there's a lot of information. All the services, what S1, S2, S3, S4 means, the type of fuel, blah, 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 if there's a B plus, whatever. All the stuff that's available, type of oxygen. So everything is in section 21 here, is right in here. So I'm not going to go over every single one of these, obviously, because it would take basically just 5 hours of one course just to do this. So I invite you to go over and be curious, to go over this and try to read as much information as you can. And when you don't get it, then just go to the description right here that I'm showing you. The way that the AFD is going to be organized, we're going to be using number one, the city name. That's not necessarily the airport name, but maybe, for example, let's think about Phoenix. Phoenix has more than one airport in Phoenix. So if you look at Phoenix, you will see Phoenix here, and then you'll see one airport name and then another airport name listed in there. Now, I'm going to show you Prescott because that's where I live. Prescott only has one airport, so there will be Prescott and then the Prescott airport next to it. There may be an alternate name in here sometimes. And then here's going to be the airport identifier, which is going to be a 3 or 4 letter identifier. We've talked about this before. If it's a civil military airport. And then number 5 here is going to be the distance from the city itself, the city that's in number 1 up here. So 3 miles to the north of the city name is going to be number 5 right here. Number 6 is going to be the UTC code. It's 6 hours behind, and during daylight savings, it's going to be 5 hours behind. Number 7 is going to be the airport reference point, the coordinates for the airport reference point. Number 8 here is going to tell you what sectional this belongs to. Again, we haven't talked about sectional charts just yet. Sectional charts are going to be the charts that you use for navigation, and each of them has a different name. So this is the sectional chart for Jacksonville, for example. I'm going to skip number 9 for now. I don't see, oh no, number 10 is right here. So number 10 is the airport diagram. You can see a lot of information here in the airport diagram, the way the runways are laid out. You're going to see information if there are trees, for example, if there is a type of lighting system, the name of the runways, the length of the runways right here. The P here means there is a PAPI available. So look at the legend for this. It'll show you there's a legend that shows you all the different details available. TPA right here stands for Traffic Pattern 11. 200 is going to be the airport elevation. B is going to tell you if there is a beacon under 12 right here. TPA right here stands for Traffic Pattern Altitude, and that's number 13. And that traffic pattern altitude is going to be 1,000 feet, that's MSL, mean sea level, and 800 feet AGL. The NOTAMs, we talked about the NOTAMs, they're going to be filed, we're going to talk about the NOTAMs in a minute, they're going to be filed in here under ORL. That's just the main airport, the main area that's going to do this. Now, the important part is the next section here. It's going to be runway 1836. So these are the different runways. You can see there's a runway 927, 1836. This is going to give you information about the runway itself. So runway 1836, runway 927. And there's some remarks. You got to read the remarks. And then there's a lot of communication information in here. What is the name of the control tower, the type of airspace that's available, and some information we don't need to worry about right now. That's the idea. Let's go ahead and find Prescott. Prescott, that's the city. And then here's the airport, Ernest A. Love Field. That's the KPRC. That's the name of the airport and the identifier. That airport is located 7 miles to the north of the city of Prescott. UTC -7. Now you're going to say there's no daylight savings. That's right. In Arizona, we do not observe daylight savings, which is, by the way, the best thing ever. The coordinates for the airport, the center of the airport is right here, and 34 degrees north, 39 minutes, 29 seconds, or 39.29 minutes. West, 112 degrees west, 29.15 minutes. The airport is located at 5,045 feet elevation. It has a beacon. The traffic pattern altitude is mentioned in the remarks. So if we go to the remarks right here, we're going to see information about the traffic pattern. It says here, TPA for traffic pattern altitude for light aircraft on all runways is 6,045 feet MSL, which is 1,000 feet AGL. Traffic pattern for large aircraft, all turboprop jet and high performance aircraft, all runways is at 1,500 AGL. AGL. Avery NOTAM, Notice to Airmen, is going to be filed under the PRC symbol. We have runways, 3 right, 2 1. That's 7,619 feet long by 150 feet wide. That's asphalt, and I don't remember what the other term here means. Runway 3, the traffic is going to be a right traffic pattern. Runway 2 1, and then a right traffic pattern. You can see a lot of information in here. Again, we have another right traffic pattern right here. Now, here's the trick with the traffic pattern in the chart supplement. As you can see, we talked about this, the right traffic here, but for this runway 12 and runway 30, you notice that there's nothing at the end. Nothing at the end means it doesn't say LFT or left traffic. It doesn't say anything. And the fact that it doesn't say anything tells us that it is indeed a left traffic. Only the right traffic here is going to be notated on here. So we have runway 3 right, runway 2 1 left, 3 1 2 1 left here. Both of these are right, but runway 12 and runway 30, both of these are left traffic pattern. This will be important later on. There is a few questions that can get tricky where there's no indication, so you need to read these. Also be careful because this is runway 1230, and obviously we have one side of the runway which is runway 12, and we have one side of the runway which is runway 30. Same thing here, we have runway 3 right and 2 1 left. This is all one runway. On one side it's runway 3 right, and on the other side it's runway 2 1 left. There's airport remarks. This airport is attended from 1300 Zulu to 500 Zulu. So if we want to find local time, we have to go back and subtract 7 hours to these numbers. So this starts at 6 a.m. and then goes all the way until 10 p.m. local. Runway 3 left, 2 1 right is closed from 0500 to 1300 Zulu, which means when the tower is not available. We have wildlife in the vicinity of runways and taxiways. Flight conditions not monitored between 2200 and 0500. Lots of information. Airport manager phone number and the CTAF frequency. We're going to talk about CTAF. We're going to talk about ATIS. That's all in here. The Unicom frequency is also in here. So this is where you find all of this information. Again, if you're confused by some of these terms, watch the rest of the slides and you will get a much better idea of what all of them means. I wanted to show you what the chart supplement look like and the type of information that you can find, but you can keep scrolling. I mean, there's hundreds of pages in here of airports after airports. See, now we're in California here. We're going to get to Utah eventually, Colorado here, New Mexico. We have associated data. This is kind of a cool one here. Flight service weather brief right here, 1-800 weather brief. We've talked about this before. Clearance delivery. Here you have the phone numbers for the key air traffic facilities. Now, not all the air traffic facilities, but large ones. For example, you have Orlando in here. You have Phoenix, Miami, Memphis, Portland. You can see all the big airports. This is for whatever, St. Louis Valley Regional Airport is a bigger airport diagram, which will show you more information than what you would get usually on other ones. You have the runways, you have the length of the runway, you have another length right here, that's a 10,000 foot runway. You can see the layout of each of the taxiways. So look, taxiway Kilo, taxiway Alpha, Bravo right here. We have pads, hangars, the terminal at the airport. This will give you the heading. So this is runway 32. It's a heading of 322. We have runway 030 here with 030.2, 142 for the heading, and this is runway 14. So a lot of cool information in these airport diagrams. So I'm going to wrap it up with the chart supplement. Let's go back to the slides and take a look at more information there. I'm going to say this right now. The NOTAMs are extremely difficult to read, and I think there's something that the FAA really needs to look at and overhaul completely. It's a complete mess. It's extremely difficult. If you fly near an airport that's very busy, the list of NOTAMs is going to be endless, and there is no possible way that you can read all of these NOTAMs. I still find myself, after 15 years, reading through some of these NOTAMs and not even understanding what the NOTAM is saying. But it has really critical information, so we need to be careful, and we need to be able to read these NOTAMs before we go fly, because it's going to contain stuff that we really need to know about. So the information that's in there is actually temporary information that's going to be critical to the flight. The thing is, these pieces of information could not be published on time. Think about the chart supplement. Chart supplement is published every 56 days. These charts cannot have some of the information that has just changed. So instead of creating a new version of the chart, basically what they do is they create a notice to airmen to let everybody know, hey, there was an obstacle here on the chart and it was 1,500 foot tall. Well, either it doesn't exist anymore, or there is a new obstacle next to it that's now 1,700 feet tall, and you need to know about it. So that's an example of a NOTAM. There are specific NOTAMs. There are NOTAMs that are specific to drone operation. These are called DROTAMs. They can be found on some of the websites. I don't see too many of them, but I know they do exist. But the bottom line is, you should always check for all NOTAMs before you fly. You should always check for NOTAMs before you fly. One way that you can check the NOTAMs is by going online on pilotweb.nas.faa.gov, or you can also use a service like flyplan.com. And there's another one, which is 1-800-weatherbrief.com, 1-800-WXbrief.com. So what kind of information do we find in NOTAMs? Well, let's take a look. Hazards such as air shows, parachute jumping. If there's any rocket launches going on around, then it's going to be issued as a NOTAM. If there are important head of states, for example, that are flying, then it's also going to be issued in a NOTAM. If there's any kind of exercises from the military that are going to cause airspace restriction, that's going to be issued in there. If there's obstacles near airfield that we need to know about, yeah, that's going to be in there as well. If there's birds, those are called bird TAMs. If there's birds flying through the airspace, that can be very dangerous for aircraft, so we need to know about that. Or if there's volcanic ashes, for example, or dust contamination. A few years back, probably 10 years ago now, I don't even remember, but there was a big volcanic eruption in Iceland, and there was a NOTAM that was issued for that because it was moving across the United States. It actually stopped traffic for several days because of that. So that would be a good example right here. There's 4 different types of NOTAMs. There's only 2 of them that I'm going to really concentrate on. The first one is NOTAM D, NOTAM FDC, so FDC NOTAMs, pointer NOTAMs, and then military NOTAMs. The last 2 I'm not going to worry about. Obviously, the military NOTAM is going to be something that applies to the military, and the pointer NOTAM is going to point towards another NOTAM. That's just so confusing. So worry about NOTAM D and FDC. Let's go ahead and take a look at what a NOTAM D is. The NOTAM D is going to be issued for all of the different, it's going to be information available for all the different navigational facilities that are part of the NAS. For example, like a public use airport. Any airport that are listed in the chart supplement can get a NOTAM D issued for any changes of information. The type of information you'll find in a NOTAM D is going to be taxiway closures, for example, which in your case doesn't really affect you. There's going to be personnel or different equipment on or near the runway, and then if there's any kind of lighting that is not going to be functional on any of the instrument approaches. FDC NOTAMs are issued by the National Flight Data Center. That's what FDC stands for. And they contain information that includes charts, procedures, and airspace usage. There are some FDC NOTAMs that you need to be aware of in your case, because some of them have to do with TFRs, temporary flight restrictions. Now, some of them have to do with flight procedures, IFR flight procedures, in which case that does not apply to you. But in this case, you really need to understand what's in those FDC NOTAMs. Now, I recommend that you go and visit the NOTAMs page, and that you find different NOTAMs and you try to read them. That's the only way that you're going to get a hang of how they work. We're going to talk about other NOTAMs. For example, there's a TFR that's in place for stadiums, and that is issued by a NOTAM. I'm not going to read the NOTAM to you, but I'll tell you what's inside, and I'll give you a reference to it.
Black women on the internet.
A complicated word for saying, what is the current local weather? The third source of information for airports is called the ATIS, and the ATIS stands for the Automated Terminal Information Service. And what you find in the ATIS is basically just a complicated word for saying, what is the current local weather at an airport? And the way that it works is it's updated every hour, and it can be changed more often than that if the conditions change a lot, but in most cases it's going to be updated every hour, and it's a recorded message, and that recorded message is going to be played on a radio frequency that you can listen to, and then each of the recordings is going to be given a letter, and it's going to start with alpha. So the first issuance in the morning of the ATIS is going to be information alpha, and then an hour later it's going to be Bravo, Charlie, Delta, and so on and so forth. It's going to keep changing throughout the day. Here's an example of the ATIS for one that I recorded in Prescott. Now, it's not going to say information alpha because I had to record it using a phone service, and in the phone service they don't give you the number. But here's the information that you would find and how it would kind of sound. Sometimes it's a robot recorded voice. Sometimes it's a real human just reading the ATIS. That's very important. You can actually listen to those on the radio if you know where to find the frequency, and it's going to give you the best possible weather information for that specific region because it's recorded at the airport. So let's listen to one and see what it reads and how it reads and the type of information that you find.
Prescott Love Field, Prescott, Arizona.
Automated weather observation 1553 Zulu. Wind calm. Visibility 10. Sky condition clear. Temperature 0, 1 Celsius. Dew point -10 Celsius. Altimeter 3006. Remarks. Density altitude 4,500.
A side note on the ATIS, if the following conditions are met, then the sky conditions and the visibility will not be reported on the ATIS. It just means that it's good enough that you don't have to worry about it. So if the ceiling is the height of the clouds, the height of the base of the clouds. So if the clouds are located higher than 5,000 feet, then it's not going to be reported on the ATIS. And also if the visibility is more than 5 statute miles, so the distance from here to the next object that we can see is more than 5 statute miles, then it's not going to be reported on the ATIS. The last source for airport data is charts. And like I said, charts is a very wide topic. So I'm going to go over this in the next presentation because there is so much more information than what I want to cover in this topic. So let's go ahead and take a look at some typical FAA questions, and then we will go back to the charts in the next chapter. There's also a quiz at the end of this presentation, so you can go ahead and take the quiz. Make sure your knowledge is good before you move on to the charts. At the approach ends of the runway indicates that the runway is orientated approximately to what? Well, you got two options here, 080260 true or 080260 magnetic. Remember my story about the runways changing over time? That's because they're magnetic, so C would be the answer. What is the correct traffic pattern departure procedure to use at a non-controlled airport? Non-controlled airport is going to be, that means that there is no control tower, which means that you're going to be basically complying with the traffic pattern that is established at that airport. And as you saw in the chart supplement, this is where we get our information. That's what you would look at. What is the purpose of the runway hold position sign? This is the reason why we talk about signs, by the way, because they are a question. So the runway position sign is to basically tell that there is a runway that's going to be coming up in front of us. So this has a figure, area C on that figure on the airport is classified as what? If we take a look at area C, you can see right there at the bottom, it's got little X's on it, which means that it is a closed runway. Which of these signs is a designation and direction of an exit taxiway from a runway? An exit taxiway from a runway. It means that we're going to be, so we can look at either J, F, or K. So J is runway 22 going in this direction, okay? F is you are located on runway 22, and then K is taxiway Bravo is on the right. So which sign is a designation and direction of an exit taxiway from a runway? That's going to be our K, which is telling us, hey, taxiway Bravo is in this direction. Again, referring to a figure right here, refer to E. I zoomed in on E. The sign is a visual cue of what? E is telling us this is Bravo, and it's a black background. So Bravo, we know that's a taxiway, and the black background means we are on the taxiway Bravo. So in here it says answer A is confirm the aircraft's location to be on taxiway Bravo. An airport's rotating beacon operated during daylight hours indicates what? Well, remember there's two reasons why the beacon is going to be turned on. The first one is because it is night, or because we have bad visibility. So in this case, it's going to be answer B, that the weather at the airport located in Class D airspace, don't worry about the Class D airspace, is below basic weather minimums. This next question, where is Lou City Municipal located with relation to the city? If you remember from what we looked at in the chart supplement, it's going to show you right here 1 northwest, which means that it's located 1 mile northwest of the city of Lou City. All right, this is it. The next chapter we're talking about is radio communication.